All right, welcome everyone. My name is John Slattery, and I'm an herbalist and forager, recent author. I live in Tucson, Arizona. The book that I recently authored is called Southwest Foraging. So this book talks about 117 different plants you can find throughout the Southwest Flower region. And what I'm going to talk about today is one of them, prickly pear. What I'm going to go into today is far more in depth than what's available in this book, but that's the opportunity for all of you today. Prickly pear fermenting with prickly pear. That's the topic of today's talk. So what you can do with all these plants, opens up a whole different realm. There's a lot of authors and practitioners, primarily a couple authors that are starting to explore different things you can do with forage foods, not just the quote traditional preparation methods, but how do we implement them in a variety of ways, including fermentations, utilizing things as spices, whether they're fermented as spices, or creating drinks, things that really impart our diet and what's on our table with the flavors of our local environment. Things that all of our ancestors experienced on a day-to-day basis before we developed systems of global distribution of assets. And so unfortunately what's resulted in that is a lot of lost knowledge of local food traditions, including the actual plants that were used for food and of course how they were used, to the point that a lot of people can't even identify any longer plants that are in their local environment that their ancestors utilized as food, maybe even 2-3 generations ago. So this is just one aspect of that, but it's a really unique plant in prickly pear, and one of the reasons why I say that is because prickly pear bridges the gap between food and medicine in an exceptional way. Probably better than any other plant that I've worked with. And what I mean by that is you can eat prickly pear on a daily basis and enjoy it for its tastes and textures perhaps, and never think about the medicinal qualities, and yet be receiving those qualities. And you could also take it on a daily basis as a medicine and acknowledge the benefit of that medicine, feel that in your body, recognize the difference, or utilize it in acute situations, whether it's a centipede bite or a sprained ankle or sunburn, and derive substantial benefit from an acute application of prickly pear as a medicine. So there aren't too many things that really fit into that category. A lot of things that are plants, herbs that are medicinal. If you eat them on a daily basis, you start to reach a threshold. So with prickly pear, you can actually consume them on a daily basis as a food and not experience an excess of them. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's why I really like this as a subject for so many things, prickly pear, because it has such a tremendous variety of applications in our lives. And so exclusively what I'm going to be talking about today is fermenting, and in particular fermenting with the fruit. So prickly pear, a lot of times we just refer to the whole plant as prickly pear. I often do. You can also say that the fruits themselves, the individual fruits, I'm sure everyone here knows what prickly pears are. You're here at the Prickly Pear Festival. They're ripe on the cacti all around us right now. It's on the cover of my book, one of the iconic symbols of the Southwest, and down into Mexico. Most people don't realize, in fact, that the lower 48 states all contain a native species of opuntia, which is what prickly pear is. So opuntia is, whether you came from Mississippi or California or Florida or North Dakota, there's opuntia where you live. Just not as much as there is here. I grew up in Illinois and never saw prickly pear, but they exist. So we're focusing on the fruit of the prickly pear and how the fruit can be fermented. Now, there's some interesting things. So this is basically going along with what I was just talking about. These are wild prickly pears that we're looking at here. So on the left, that's springtime in this region. And the hills can just be covered with these yellow blossoms of prickly pear. They are predominantly yellow. What are those called? The flowers. Actually, technical botanical term, those are tepals, not petals. So the inner tepals are yellow here, and then there's a tinge of salmon, orangish pink on the outer tepals. And you can see, and then you see how the bottom left corner of that photo, that's the predominant colors. So they can kind of, in a sense, shift from yellow to that salmon pink as they age, which is not really the same thing as, say, an evening primrose, that the entire tissue of that, corolla changes color as it dies. That's actually an indication of that plant family. But it's the outer tepals that are the different color, the darker color that you see once the flower collapses. And then here's the ripe fruit. Really, a lot of people think that when the prickly pear fruit is red, then it's ripe. Well, I'll tell you, there's some fruit that doesn't ever get red. It just stays a very pale pink, and it will come to full ripeness, get sweet, fall off, and never get red. So there's a gradation of colors, both on the outside and the inside, and it's really a matter of getting acquainted with the actual varieties in your area. Which, and one thing I was going to say here, the season in this general area, say, lowest elevations in Florence, or even the west side of the Phoenix Valley, maybe mid-July in an early year to late July, early August. And then further down south in the higher uplands of the Sonoran Desert around Tucson, second week, even third week of October, you can still find ripening prickly pear fruit. So it's quite a elongated season. And so here's what I'm talking about. This is one of the common varieties, I'm calling it. It's not a cultivar, it's just something that, this is my observation and my name, but working with prickly pear for over a decade in about a 75-mile radius of Tucson, I found this is one of the common early season prickly pears. And this, so backing up a moment, prickly pear cacti are highly promiscuous. They exchange their genetic information outside of our taxonomical nomenclature readily. So people say, what species is that? What is that? Well, the plants don't exist according to our speciation. That's something that we've come up with as a means to attempt to figure out patterns in nature. But nature itself is amorphous. And some plants, that's less distinguishable. With prickly pear, it's exceptionally apparent that they merge and change, and you can see, you can select maybe 12 to 15 different qualities or factors of a prickly pear, and it's like a roll of the dice and mix up and see what comes up in each location. So in a certain population, I could see evidence of maybe two species, like Phaeacantha, which is prominent with this fruit type, or Ingomanii, which is a little more common up here. And I can get 8 different fruits from that local population. So the type of fruit doesn't necessarily pertain to the species. Is what I'm trying to say. So this one I call pink egg because the glimmer of the sun does not make it so evident, but it is a little bit more pink. And this one tends more to the red. So you see, within each category, there's going to be a spectrum. It's not like you get the round peg and you put it in the round hole and it fits tightly. And there isn't any other hole but the triangle. And there isn't any hole but the rectangle. It's all a spectrum. But, there's an identifiable phenotype or pattern where this flesh that's in between the seeds and the outer skin doesn't get any darker than that. So a lot of people might think, well, that's not ripe yet because it doesn't have the redness. It's just, certainly there's less betalains, which is one of the bioflavonoids that's present in prickly pear, which gives it its red color, and also gives beets their red color. And purslane stems, when they age, that's the same redness. So this one evidently has less of that, but this can still be quite sweet. And so this one I call pink egg because its shape is a little bit ovoid, like an egg, and they're generally pink, not too dark. So this is them on the cactus. So you can see how they're almost bleached a little bit. And their shape, right there, it's an egg that got its top cut off, its top point. And very little to no spines on the fruit, but there can be spines present at the base of the fruit with this variety. Just minor details. That don't necessarily have everything to do with fermenting, but I wanted to bring it up ahead of time because it's about developing relationship with the plants in your environment, beginning to understand the differences. And one of the key differences between this one, what I call copper brick red, it can be brick red, copper brick red, The copper is this lighter tone that you might be seeing in the uncut fruit on the bottom. And so the inner pulp of this one tastes to me a lot like Fruit Loops. It was a cereal that I got every once in a while when I was a kid. You know, maybe 5 times in my life I got to eat Fruit Loops, but it was that special, you know, tropical fruit sweetness that almost nothing else that I experienced had that flavor. So this has like a tropical fruit sweetness in the center pulp. If you pick it too early, it might just be sour and bitter and no sweetness whatsoever, with hardly any external differentiation from the early sour and bitter to the later sweetness. With the exception of with this variety, this one can become much more readily shriveled on the outside to make you think that it's no good. And so for years, I passed up on this variety and never picked it until I started actually tasting them as different from the other kind. They were smaller, they were skinnier, they looked shriveled. I said, they're looking like they're sunburned. Like, no, these are, I'm not going to bother with these. And then I realized I was passing up on a whole section of the season, and then this tropical sweetness flavor as well. And you also notice that the tops of them are still concave. A lot of my original rule of thumb with prickly pear when harvesting is they're ripe when that top swells open and starts to crack and spread. So that was another reason in my mind that this was not good. But I just really wasn't looking closely enough. So one of the things I like to say in my classes in general, but especially on prickly pear, there are no absolutes. So you can observe a population and make up rules for what you see, but those rules will be broken once you start to expand your terrain and look at other populations, because they're so highly variable. Which could be another reason why they're so prolific. They're adaptable. So that's the copper brick red on the cactus. You can see how the top is kind of shriveled up. So that's a really good point for harvesting. And so I mentioned that this was a Puntia phaeacantha. Phaeacantha has that characteristic of lots of small, short, brownish spines along the top rim of the cactus. You know, it doesn't so much correlate with long white spines that are downward pointing. If you read a book, that'll indicate Engelmannii. So this is where you see the two of the populations are coming together. They're expressing different characteristics. Phaeacantha also generally won't grow above 3 pads or 3 clados high. It'll go 3 high and then continue to spread out. So that's another quality. But again, these are spectral qualities as opposed to, you know, definitive angles. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments up to this point?
I just wanted to, are they real big, the dark brick red ones, like way bigger?
There are other larger fruits out there.
Because I saw some like so big, and then like right now, like the pinky ones that are
They're a little bit more cylindrical, in that the top and the bottom are almost the same width. Pink ones? Pink ones are more egg-shaped. Yeah, that's why I call them pink eggs.
But these were like really big, like.
Yeah, there's, like I said, I can go into one population and identify 8 different types.
And elevation has nothing to do.
There's a lot of things that have something to do with it, and I think it's more than any one person, including myself, could really say. I admit to not knowing a lot about this.
Because like in Oracle, they're really big, and in Arabica, they're really big. And the elevation is different.
Right.
How do you know when a prickly pear fruit is ripe?
My best suggestion is to taste it. You get more of a feel for it. There's other qualities too in how well it falls off the cactus, but even, I'll give you an example where I saw shriveled fruit on the cactus, fruit falling off the cactus, which usually means they're all ripe, and we took it off and we tasted it, and it was bland at best. It almost tasted kind of musty, like it started to get moldy or mildewy in there. The sugars never matured. So don't just go by the feel or how easily it comes off and just by the color, but taste it too, and then you can get a general idea of what's happening in that population. So you can get, they can be really salty at first too, because the salty quality is there for a reason, I believe, so that the fruit can continue to hold moisture. When the moisture comes, they can pull it up really quick, and then they could be subjected to the intense rays of the sun and convert that moisture that they hold into sugars, into So another thing you can do is follow the example of the other animals. When you start to see bites out of them, one of the times that really keyed it in for me, it was a lot of rain and then like 3 successive days of like 90 plus and clear skies and sunny. And then wasps were going in and eating the prickly pear. So I could tell there was enough sugar for them to go after it. That was something relevant to the weather pattern.
I've heard that the seeds, some people eat the seeds and I hear that some people don't. Are the seeds good for you or does it matter?
I'll just say that I don't eat the seeds and I don't necessarily advocate for them, but there are people that do.
Do they give you like upset stomach or I heard that they just really good for you because.
There's people from San Luis Potosí. Anyone here from San Luis Potosí? They say there's a nickname for people there. They call them like the name for the naked back of the knees because they eat so much prickly pear that they're always going to the bathroom. and some of them apparently eat the seeds with the fruit.
When you eat the whole food, you have to feel it like the body.
In talking about eating the fruits, generally peel it to make sure you get off the glochids and the spines.
So you feel all those.
Have I peeled these?
Yeah.
No, I haven't yet.
Or did you look for it?
If I want to eat them. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions about what I was
How about
sharing?
temperature change? Could they be like, I don't know, go foul or something? Or you cook it or when you're preparing it?
Could they go bad?
Yeah, or you gotta have it put at a certain temperature.
We could really open up a whole school of thought here in terms of like evaluating prickly pear. There's a lot of ways to go with this. I'd really like to stay focused on the fermentation, but I'll address in bites what I'm sharing about fermentation, what they're asking. Did anyone else have any questions about what I was sharing?
Those 2 types that you went over, those ones you use more regularly than the other kinds?
Those are widely available in my area right now.
Okay. Do they ripen at different times of the season or?
As I was saying earlier, there's a staggered phase, so in your population, you'll probably have several different types. The early type, which in one population that I just visited the other day, the copper brick reds are the first ones, and the pink eggs. And there's another type I call the red jacks. They're very tight on the bottom, fluted bottom and fluted top, and those don't ripen until late September or early October. So it's just about getting to know your population.
So where in Tucson do you think?
Outside. That's all I can say about that. Anything
Not
else about?
Catalinas or anything?
Sorry?
Not Catalinas or?
They like flatter areas in general. Yeah, benches, upper benches.
So if you have a plant that's quite large, and say like most of it is dark and yours has a little bit light, is it best to test like each of those kinds of fruits on the same plant? Because they could vary depending on where they fall.
One simple method is to try one and then see if there's anything different out there. If anything else different on that plant that may inspire you to choose it or to sample it.
Okay.
We have to use a little bit of our intuition again. This is something that's been beaten out of us for generations. So we have a living, breathing relationship with all things around us. We just have to exercise it. And therefore the information starts to come through horizontal transfer. Not necessarily, we've all been educated in a top-down model where, you can't take another step until somebody tells you how to do it. But going out and interacting with the natural world, this is one thing that bacteria, I think, mirrors to us quite effectively. Bacteria, one of the amazing things about them, even though we said 50 years ago that we were going to annihilate them and they'd be all gone by the 20th century, but they're still around and they're thriving, and they're the reason we live, actually. But bacteria do something that's called horizontal gene transfer. They can go, one group even can go in and surmise an area, learn about it, and then go and just kind of bump into the other population and transfer a new genetic manipulation to adapt to what's present in that environment. So this is all about, at a microscopic level, this exchange of information through interrelationship. So we just got to get out there and do it. I didn't go to school for any of this stuff, although I've searched around, but a lot of this just comes from my own experience and just pulling pieces together. And as a community, we could take this to an even higher level if everyone, who had an interest was out there exploring, because everyone's going to learn something different, depending on what your curiosities are, what's calling to you. And then when we come to events or things like this in our community and share, then it raises everybody's level up. I think that's the most important thing, which has a lot to do with fermentation. So fermentation, what does fermentation mean? Just listening to a talk the other day by Sandor Katz. If anybody hasn't heard of him and you're interested in fermentation, check out his books. There's one that's pretty basic. You can get a lot of recipes and insight, and there's one more encyclopedic and a lot of information. They're both great. He's just a normal guy that decided he liked fermentation and started to explore it and kept exploring and shared it with people, and the feedback was great, so he kept going. It's an excellent example of just following your passion. And so he said the transformative power of microorganisms. Microorganisms is a really easy way to just cover a whole world out there that we can't see. Things that we are largely afraid of in our environment, in our culture, I should say, because of how we identified pathogens under the microscope. Whereas, centuries ago, people who practiced fermentation in their culture often did so in a ritualistic, spiritualized context. There was prayer, there was reverence, there was a lot of ceremony around, the cultivation of this new life, this transformation, transformative power that came out of this pot or this barrel or whatever it was. So that's, I think, what captivated a lot of people. And then when we can look at it biochemically and physiologically, kind of break it down and see what some of these organisms are doing and start to understand, oh, wow, there's something there with the gut-brain connection. Interesting. That's what all the cultures have been saying all along. If you just go back and listen to anywhere that was still an extant culture and had some wisdom present in their healing traditions or their relationship with local food culture, plants and animals, that's what's present in fermentation. So I think that has a lot to do with why it's become popular again, in that people are waking up to how they can heal themselves through food and some of the extra potency that may be present in fermentation. So when I speak about fermentation, what does that mean? Or what's happening there? What's necessary? So I broke it down into a few select essentials, so-called, of fermentation. You got to have some fuel. The microorganisms need something to eat. What do they eat? Sugars. So that could be as simple as, cane sugar, or it can be your apple, or the bit of sugar that's in prickly pear. Prickly pear, by the way, as far as fruits go, fruits with any level of sweetness at all, is at like the bottom of the rung in terms of sugars. That's one of the lowest glycemic indexes of anything that you want to put in your mouth. It's like 4 or 5 glycemic index, super low. So I usually add sugars to prickly pear when I'm fermenting, but you gotta give the organism something, and those are the organisms. Yeasts and bacteria primarily, but that's what most people are referring to when they're talking about, and when they get little packets of things, those are normally yeast, sometimes some bacteria. Occasionally fungi jump in there too, in a SCOBY, but not molds. I'm not talking about molds. Usually molds is something that's gone awry, or at least something that you don't want, but then there's, what about dairy? So if you're saying kefir, you don't like the molds, but if it's a blue cheese, then you like the molds. So it's not so much about right or wrong, but what is your cultural preference or your individual taste. And then an anaerobic environment. Has anyone ever made sauerkraut before? Pretty simple thing, right? It's a little bit daunting when people first start out and they're not quite sure how to do it, but you just got to take a couple of small steps and then just get out of the way. But one of the important things to prevent mold growth, it doesn't ruin the batch even, but just to keep all the vegetables pressed beneath the level of the water. And so that creates an anaerobic environment, meaning that the molds can't grow on the sugars of the vegetables with the given oxygen present above your moisture. And then that's also why, I don't know if anyone was here for the beer talk, and if he talked about airlocks, but airlocks are used in the primary fermentation to prevent oxygen from getting in there.